All right then. Howdy. We are recording, I assume. Welcome to question and answer number 159. I am your host, pannobhasa. This is your co-host, my beverage. And 159, I must say, although odd, is not prime because it is 3 times 53. And I'm dispensing with coffee because I already drank enough coffee today. So I'm just kind of tapering off the caffeine with an energy drink. Or something. Tapering off some sort of essential oils contained in coffee, but not contained in this particular energy drink. And I spent part of my glorious day of laziness today hauling rocks, or just loading rocks into my car, because we spent several $100s on lots and lots of rocks today. In fact, most of it is going to be coming on pallets, like from a flatbed truck with a forklift mounted on back, just because it was too many rocks for our little car. So it's kind of late. In fact, this Q&A may span 2 days because it may be after midnight before I'm done with it. As you can see, the fish tank is already in moonlight mode. The fish are already preparing to go to bed, and I'm just now starting this Q&A. So I guess that we should just get into it. And the first question is from Seobakshan Sipad Zidana, who tried to ask 5 questions, but he did not succeed in getting all 5 of them on this Q&A. And his first question is as follows. After living in Burma for decades, do you think villagers are better people than city folk with better morals? One of the first things I thought of when I saw this is there's a saying in Burma. I don't remember the Burmese original, but it is to the effect of a man looking for a wife should look for a village girl because village girls make better wives than city girls. But it might be a somewhat different reason than better people being better people. It's just that village people are simpler. They're simple-hearted. And they probably have fewer desires and all that, which might make a village woman more content as a man's wife than a city girl who's just wanting this and that and never satisfied, kind of a thing. My experience, though, with Burmese people living in villages and Burmese people living in cities is really, it's just a matter of like simplicity of life and simplicity of heart to some degree than actual goodness. Because I've met plenty of very good people in cities, plenty of very good people in villages, and I mean, I'd have to do some kind of statistical study to find out if there's like a significant correlation between being a better person and being a village person, as opposed to being a worse person and living in a city. But my experience is that really Burmese people, as a general rule, I mean, the ones that would be dealing with me, I mean, this is kind of a filter that might make my experience less than objective, because the people that were interacting with me for the most part were people that were really into like supporting monks, that were like devout Buddhists who were really gung-ho with regard to supporting the Sangha and supporting me and so forth. So yeah, I mean, you've got bad people living in the cities, possibly more violent criminals and so forth. You can get away with less in a village. There's going to be less, sexual misconduct, less thievery, less murder, that kind of thing in a village, simply because everybody knows what everybody else is up to. There's not a whole lot of privacy in a village. Everybody knows everybody else pretty much. Although, I mean, I lived way the heck out in the sticks in Burma, like amongst hillbillies. And, I mean, I was living on the edge of a national park, and the villages that were closest, just right on the border of the national park, had their economy largely based on poaching in the national park. So, I mean, I've seen guys just walking down the trail heading into the park, and a duck flies by. They just frantically look for any rock or stick or anything that they can fling at that duck, just on the off chance that they hit it and kill it. So it's just different flavors of morality and immorality that you'll find in a village as opposed to a city. But I wouldn't really say that village people are necessarily better on average than city people. And I'm just going to move on to the next question here. Also from Covax and CPAD Z9. This is a biology question. He says, what is the difference between a population, race, subspecies, and species? I know for species you could just say that they can reproduce together, but that doesn't seem to be a universal enough definition, since bacteria and such don't have sexual reproduction. So the definition doesn't really work. Well, that's actually not entirely true, because even bacteria they do have a kind of sexual reproduction. I can't remember what it's called. I don't think it's conjugation, but bacteria will actually come up to another bacterium, and they've got like this tube. They will actually inject some of their own DNA into this other bacterium. So that even bacteria do have a kind of sexual reproduction. With regard to something like amoebas, I'm not sure. But let's see. What's the difference between a population, race, subspecies, and species? A population is just any group of, I assume, the same species that are just living together in the same area. You could just call that a population, and the area could be largely, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Tell me in the comments. It's arbitrary. Okay, forget the comments. It's just largely arbitrary. What is going to form the population? Whether you're going to say it's going to be all the whatever species it is living in this general area between this river and that mountain range or whatever, or you want to just say that it's this herd of wildebeest in Africa, this particular herd, whatever. I assume population is largely an arbitrary thing that if it's used in like a scientific paper or something, it would have to be defined. What does this population consist of before moving on and just referring to the population. Race is, I do think that at least it used to be used for animals other than humans. That race was just a kind of, like a local variation. I mean, they could interbreed with other members of the same species easily, no problem. It's just that isolation as a general rule has caused, the favoring of certain variations well within the scope of the species. It'd be sort of like breeds in dogs, although, of course, breed is different because a breed would be largely artificially produced. So, yeah, I would guess that race is just kind of like a local peculiarity that is peculiar enough that it's considered significant enough to, single it out. Subspecies is you're getting closer to species level. And I could have looked this up in a dictionary. I didn't look up subspecies in a dictionary. But I mean, you're getting into like controversial. I mean, all of this is relatively controversial. For example, Neanderthals, are they their own species, or are they, like I was taught when I was in school, a subspecies? You had Homo sapiens sapiens, you had Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. Two different subspecies. So a subspecies would probably be, they're starting to be like behavioral or physiological barriers between really like maximum efficiency with regard to interbreeding. Just behavioral or whatever it is, that there's already starting to be certain barriers or obstacles. Like, I guess, like modern humans and like Neanderthals, for some reason there wasn't like complete compatibility, that the fertility of a Neanderthal female impregnated or attempted to be impregnated by a Homo sapiens sapiens male, I mean, it wouldn't be as high as with two Homo sapiens sapiens or two Neanderthals. So, I mean, exactly where you draw the line, obviously, it's going to be somewhat controversial because, as I say, some scientists, some authorities will consider Neanderthals to be a subspecies of Homo sapiens, and others will consider Neanderthalensis or Homo neanderthalensis just to be its own species. So there's taxonomy is one of the least objective fields in biology. I think there's so much like politics involved. Like Linnaeus, who devised modern taxonomy, he knew that humans and chimpanzees should belong to the same genus. But he also knew that if he put humans and chimpanzees in the same genus, or humans and any other animal in the same genus, he would be excommunicated from the church, which in the 18th century was just social death. So he put humans and chimpanzees in different families, even though a human and a chimpanzee are more closely related than a chimpanzee and a gorilla. But chimpanzees and gorillas belong to the family Pongidae. Humans belong to the family Hominidae, which is not good science, but that's the way it has been for a few hundred years now. It's like the closer you get to humans, the more finely differentiated things get, which also is not exactly objective. So taxonomy is, I mean, it's largely arbitrary. I mean, you can say, sure, there's a difference between plants and animals, but then you get to something like a euglena, which is a single-celled, I mean, you can call it a flagellate protozoan, but also it's got like chloroplasts. It photosynthesizes. It's green like a plant. So you get to really simple stuff, and it can get controversial, even differentiating plants from animals. So, yeah, it's to some degree controversial or just arbitrary. I mean, clearly you can say a human being is a different species from a chimpanzee. Human being is a different species from a Pacific bottlenose dolphin. But, I mean, you got Pacific bottlenose dolphins and Atlantic bottlenose dolphins. They're called different species, but could they interbreed? Is there any kind of blending? Like they are connected, like this, what is it? The Cape of Good Horn. You know, they can swim around that, mixed together. Who knows? So let's see here. Yeah, I guess. I suppose with regard to species, for animals that really do not reproduce sexually, then I mean you've got like the famous lesbian lizards that reproduce by parthenogenesis. The babies are just clones of the mothers, or I assume some single-celled organisms reproduce this entirely through like binary fission. Like amoebas or something, they just split in half. So how would you define species? There is just probably, for the most part, I mean, traditionally, they look different. And maybe they behave differently. I mean, that's one of the profound things I learned in biology, taking biology as a student, is that like organisms, like animals in particular, they differ from two species will differ from each other to the same, approximately to the same extent behaviorally as like physically. So it seems to me that, it could almost be a law to the extent that two species differ physically. I mean, they will differ to a corresponding degree behaviorally. And that happens with like races, males and females, that kind of thing also. I mean, we're built differently, and that's going to just have a built-in pressure, like a evolutionary pressure for us to behave differently. A big, strong animal is just going to behave differently from a small, weak animal, for example. So, enough biology, I guess. And so I'm just going to move on to the third question of Sea of Action, Sipadzina. Although I will not move on to a fourth. He says, thoughts on public nudity? ? Curious because the Jain monks and some Hindu ascetics walk around naked, and I don't know how to feel about it. Someone told me it was normal in many ancient cultures like Greece and India, but it was condemned in others like Middle Eastern cultures, and hence why those places being conquered by Semitic traditions made it taboo. Yeah, I think even in countries where public nudity was not illegal, like ancient classical Greece or India, still it was considered to be like kind of demeaning to one's dignity if one was like a high status kind of person. Like in ancient Rome, they had a certain holiday called the Lupercalia, where men would run around naked, and they'd have like some kind of little, like a whip-like thing, and they'd like give like token little lashes to women, which was a kind of fertility ritual. And Mark Antony participated in the Lupercalia, was running around naked, and it was just sort of like a political scandal. His opponents were just mock outrage like you find all the time in modern American politics. How can like a patrician be acting this way, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And so it was just considered to be kind of a fringe thing, like some weird philosophers can do that sort of thing, or maybe it's like a really poor person, some poor crazy person, homeless person, they could do that sort of thing. But like a respectable citizen, as a general rule, isn't going to be walking around naked unless there's some special purpose for it, like the Lupercalia or athletic competitions, which women weren't even allowed to attend, that sort of thing. But public nudity, it just reminds me of a saying of my father, my dear departed father, who was somewhat of a nudist. In the morning, he'd be walking around the house, scratching himself naked. And he used to say, if the good Lord intended people to be walking around naked, they'd have been born that way. Which is a good point, it seems to me. So, public nudity, yeah, it's largely this human neurosis with regard to sexuality. That there have been human beings in modern times. Australian Aborigines wandered around naked, like the inhabitants of Tierra del Fuego before they all got wiped out by smallpox or tuberculosis or whatever it was. They would wander around naked, and it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like they were just horny all the time and raping each other all the time. I guess I shouldn't say that word on YouTube. But yeah, I think the taboo on nudity in the West is largely because of Christianity. And it reminds me of, there's a story in the Old Testament. I think it's in Genesis. Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And Noah got drunk and passed out in his tent. His son Ham walks in, just completely innocently walks in, sees his father passed out naked. He just turns around and leaves, tells his other 2 brothers, and then the other 2 brothers, they get a cloak or something, and they both back in holding the cloak, and they cover their father without looking at him. And then when Noah sobers up, he curses Ham for having seen him naked. So I'm not exactly sure why like Middle Eastern, like Abrahamic religions have such a taboo against nudity. I don't know why, but human beings tend to be fairly neurotic about sexual stuff anyway. So it could be some of that, but why the Semitic peoples were really so anti-nudity, I'm not sure exactly, because like my dad said, The good Lord wanted people to be walking around naked. They'd have been born that way. So, I mean, I don't consider public nudity to be inherently immoral. Like, there is a rule, a rule of monastic discipline for Theravada Buddhist monks against a monk walking around naked unless his robes have been stolen or destroyed or some such thing. And the reason is not that it was like demeaning to a monk's like his dignity to be naked in public. It was that lay people were confusing the Buddhist monks with Ajivaka monks. And the Ajivaka monks wandered around naked. They didn't own anything. They didn't even own an alms bowl. Some Jains were like that too. When they just wander naked through the village when they go for alms, and they would just accept food into their cupped hands and then just stand there in the street eating it. So that was the reason why monks were required to wear clothes or a robe. Or actually, no, I think I might be confusing my rules of monastic discipline. There is a rule of monastic discipline preventing monks from bathing naked in the rain. And so somebody sent a servant girl to see some monks about something, and they're bathing naked in the rain. She just turns around, comes back, and she said, I didn't see any Buddhist monks. There were just Ajivakas there. Because, again, people were confusing Buddhists with Ajivakas. Because the Ajivakas went around naked, the Buddhists didn't. You know, it was just kind of like part of the uniform, like shaving the head. But I'm just sort of gilding the lily with my answers because I really just do not think that public nudity is inherently immoral. The reactions of other people who see somebody naked could be very immoral, like a beautiful woman who's just walking naked down the street. It could be causing all sorts of impure thoughts, not only in men, but like women who are getting pissed off at her because she looks so good or whatever. So, or because their husband is just like staring at her with his mouth open. So let's see here. Yeah, I guess I gave quite a few thoughts on public nudity. I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Romeo. And we are, in fact, recording. I'm looking at this thing again. And the little green bar is going back and forth, which indicates the microphone is working. And it looks like I'm not lagging because I did close all the extra unnecessary tabs before starting this video. I do learn from experience occasionally. So Romeo says, what is your knowledge and opinion of the healing of emotional and physical illnesses by clearing one's chakras? And I mean, Theravada Buddhism really does not endorse the chakra system. That chakras, I would guess that they came from like yoga, which would be like Sankhya. That was one of the pet theories of the Sankhyas. And then when some of the Sankhya people got incorporated into Hinduism under the name of yoga with a capital Y, then the chakra theory, along as like the three gunas, you know, you've got the Sattvic guna symbolized by the color white, the Rajasic guna symbolized by the color red, the Tamasic guna symbolized by the color black, which is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. That also certainly came from Sankhya, which got incorporated in part into Hinduism or proto-Hinduism as yoga. So, yeah, I mean, there's no mention of chakras in the suttas. So, what is my knowledge and opinion of the healing of emotional and physical illnesses by clearing one's chakras? I do think that chakras are kind of a gimmick. You know, it's just like, I think in the suttas, there's like this idea of nadis, or nadi literally means something like stream. You got these energy streams going through your body, which is, in some ways, I think it comes closer to like Chinese traditional medicine, which also has, you know, its own system, which is not in agreement, or at least not obviously in agreement with various other traditional like systems of medicine. Like in the West, you had like Galen's his theory of the four humors, which prevailed up through the medieval times, up until modern times. So I do think it's kind of a gimmick. It's just a kind of way of kind of wrapping your head around something using a certain system, and it's largely belief in the system, which produces a kind of placebo effect. It's like tarot cards also. I think I brought tarot cards up recently, maybe in the previous Q&A, where people can prognosticate, or they can come up with sometimes can come up with valid information or wisdom through the use of these tarot cards. When, I mean, wisdom or any kind of paranormal powers are not like impregnated into these cards. I mean, it's just like cardboard and laminated with plastic and some ink. That's all it is. But the people believe that by the help of these cards, they can come up with this information, and they don't believe that they can come up with the same information without the cards as effectively, so they use the cards as a kind of gimmick or crutch. And I do think to some degree the chakra system is similar. I mean, there could be that you've got like some kind of spiritual energy going up the spine somehow that has a better, more effective flow the more spiritually advanced you get. I mean, it's possible. But I do think for the most part, it's just a kind of arbitrary system that conveniently helps pre-modern, pre-scientific people understand things. And sometimes they understood things better than modern people do. And so it has value. It seems to work. Just like tarot cards seem to work. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep selling them. So, I mean, so long as somebody involved has this faith in the healing of emotional and physical illnesses by clearing one's chakras, then it could be, it's like a kind of faith healing. But then again, Reverend Teacher Mary Baker Eddy considered all medicine to just be placebos. We just have faith that medicine works, and so it works. And people who believe in the chakra system have faith that the chakra system accounts for some level of reality anyway, and so for them at least it does. And it's just a convenient way of just measuring somebody's spiritual advancement. First chakra is just survival, second chakra is sex, third chakra is like status and power, fourth chakra is compassion, and so on. Until you get to the crown chakra on the top of the skull, which is full enlightenment apparently, which is even higher than the third eye. But I mean, no science that I know of is going to verify the opening of the third eye in some yogic sage, or the opening of the crown chakra in an enlightened being, anything like that. And so I think I'm just going to move on to Romeo's second question, which is, what do you think is the most effective process to heal oneself via chakras? And then in parentheses, he's got mantras, meditation, visualization, question mark. And so the most effective process to heal oneself via chakras, find some Ayurvedic practitioner or some other kind of Hindu practitioner who is an expert on chakras, who's going to have deep faith in his chakras, the whole system, and like the effective processes of healing somebody. And then go to them, and then they'll help you to heal your chakras. Because it's going to take faith, in my opinion. I did have my chakras aligned for free by a person in California before I came to South Carolina. And what he said to me is, he was like kind of waving his hands over me and this kind of thing. And he was telling me, my first chakra is solid, nothing to worry about. My second chakra is kind of out of balance, which makes sense because I was celibate for 30 years. And, he just kind of waved his hands at me and just kind of cleared my chakras that way, at least to some degree. Did the best he could under the circumstances. So, yeah, what do I think is the most effective process to heal oneself via chakras? Well, I mean, healing oneself I mean, if that is like disqualifying, that's excluding these chakra healers who specialize in this, because that would be the obvious thing to do. Just find someone who specializes in healing through chakras. Sort of like brain surgery or something. It's like, you don't want to do it on yourself. That could be very dangerous. But you go to some expert on brain surgery, he does it for you. But if you're going to heal yourself, then, I mean, I guess it would just be like, be as well balanced and grounded and healthy, mentally especially, but also physically, and just practice spiritually in as, comprehensive way as possible, not just specializing in some kind of niche kind of meditation, something like that, but just try to be as just all over wholesome as you can. And I mean, you got to be careful though. It's like, if you're trying to be as all over wholesome as you can and you're celibate, for example, and you're just horny all the time, then that could cause problems with your second chakra. So, golly, I'm no authority on chakras. So, I mean, really, the best thing you can do, if you want to clear your chakras, get them all balanced and everything, go to a person who specializes in healing with the chakra system, which would be like an Ayurvedic practitioner or some such. But healing yourself, all you can really do is just try to be as natural and spiritual at the same time. Because being unnatural, I mean, it can mess you up, at least like physically. Like, you read some of the stories of like Catholic saints, like medieval Catholic saints. They were really definitely saints. They were like moral geniuses. I mean, they were just like completely moral to the extent that they were able, according to their understanding of morality, which was, of course, predominantly Christian. But still, I mean, they would have all kinds of like health problems and so forth. St. John of the Cross, one of my favorite Christians, I mean, he died relatively young from, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, erysipelas. It was some sort of skin infection that he got. And probably it's just like the unnatural austerity, just the almost inhuman self-restraint. I mean, just consider what Freud said about too much self-restraint. It can just make you a basket case. So, I mean, that was the price they paid for their saintliness. And it works for Buddhists too. But the best, most effective process to heal yourself via chakras, I mean, it would depend on what chakra it was too. I mean, if you got a sexual chakra problem, then the way of healing that might be very different from like a compassion chakra problem. So, yeah, I think for starters, even if you're not going to get healed by a person who is some kind of a chakra healer, then you could ask them for advice, and they would probably be able to advise you better than I could, partly because I consider the chakra thing to be largely an arbitrary kind of cooked up system that works because people believe in it. And at least it has enough, what's the word? I keep blanking out on words. Correspondence with empirical reality that you can kind of map one to the other. Each chakra represents some specific stage of spiritual development. So, I mean, it's empirical to that extent anyway. Whether it actually involves any kind of like energy nodes associated with your spinal region, that is a little bit more questionable. So, yeah, I guess of the three examples he gives, mantras, meditation, and visualization, then yeah, I'd go with meditation. Definitely meditation. And I'm going to move on to Romeo's third question, which is, are chakras tied to Buddhism in any way? If so, how? Well, I would guess there's more chakra stuff in Mahayana Buddhism than in Theravada, just because Mahayana Buddhism developed later than Theravada. At least, sort of like some of the foundational ideas of Mahayana. They were in India, possibly, before some of these schools came into being. Chakras may have already been established as just Indian culture, which was not the case in the Buddhist time, I'm pretty sure. So any school of Buddhism that arose after the chakra system had been absorbed into mainstream Indian spiritual culture, then there may be emphasis on chakras. I have seen one Western monk, a Theravada Buddhist monk, that was interviewed by Brian Rue on one of his shows, who practices yoga in addition to doing Buddhist meditation and so forth. He's an ordained Theravada Buddhist monk, but being a Westerner, he's a bit more eclectic than most Asian Theravada Buddhists. And so he's actually brought chakras and like yogic practices and so forth into his own practice. I think he was a disciple of Bhante Gunaratana at one time, but now I think he's got his own place somewhere in the United States. So chakras are tied to Buddhism, partly through schools that arose late enough that chakras were already incorporated into like just general Indian spiritual culture, and also like Western eclectics, or to some degree just westernized Asian bhikkhus or nuns who have practiced yoga as part of their spiritual practice even before their ordination, and so they can talk about chakras and so forth. But like, you're not going to find chakras mentioned, at least not in this sense, in the like the Pali Suttas, I'm pretty sure. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rui. And Rui says, do you believe right view can be a byproduct of meditation? Or is right view the cause of seeing value in meditation? Isn't recognition of suffering already right view, and thus the necessary condition for the path to be undertaken? Well, there's different right views. I mean, there's like the beginner's right view, and the beginner's right view is going to be very different from like the enlightened sage's right view. So the beginner's right view is just going to be mentioned in the text. You believe in morality, you believe in like karmic retribution, you believe that you should practice meditation and so forth, maybe at least keep 5 precepts, that kind of thing, to know the Four Noble Truths, that sort of thing. But the more advanced you get, the more right view becomes just silent. The highest right view is non-perceptual, non-verbal right view. So right view evolves as your own spiritual development advances or evolves. So it can certainly it can be a byproduct of meditation, or at least the evolution of your right view is going to be like encouraged by spiritual practice. The wiser you get, the more advanced or sophisticated right view you're going to get. Not all right view is the same right view. So, yeah, I mean, this whole question of is right view the cause of seeing value in meditation? I think Ram Dass is the one who sort of introduced me to the idea that Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, which is like morality, concentration, and wisdom, they're like a tripod. It's not like you have to have one before you get the next, and then you have to get that before you get the next one. It's like a lot of people think Sila, before you can master, or before you can get high Samadhi, you have to master Sila. And then before you can get high wisdom, you have to master Samadhi. But really, it's more like a tripod, because you're not going to practice at all without some wisdom. So, yeah, I mean, they develop together. Sila, Samadhi, and Panya develop together. And again, just as you get more advanced, your morality is going to become more sophisticated and subtle. Your wisdom is going to become more sophisticated and subtle. Your concentration is going to become more sophisticated and subtle. And so they're just going to continue evolving together. So right view, at least improvements in right view, like increased subtlety in right view, certainly can be a byproduct of meditation, even though the meditation itself may have been a kind of byproduct of like a basic right view. They just evolved together. So let's see, isn't recognition of suffering already right view? To some degree, especially if it's recognition of suffering in a certain way. You know, like the recognition of suffering of Achilles on the plains of Troy. I mean, he certainly acknowledged that there was suffering. In fact, he was inflicting lots of it. But still, that in itself is not necessarily right view. There might be some rudiments, you know, some germs of right view in there. But still, it all develops and advances until finally you just wind up with emptiness. The highest right view is emptiness. Empty mind. So I'm just going to move on to Rui's next question. And he's sort of following up on a question he asked 2 Q&As ago. And he says, in session 157, and it's kind of interesting that these Q&As are called sessions. It's not episode 159, it's session 159. So anyways, he says, in session 157 by narrative, I didn't mean any sort of speech, act, or utterance, but the inner filmic unfolding of stories and images that often seems quite independent and have a life of its own. However, could the perception of this seeming independence be just a form of delusion? So he's referring to a narrative of just sort of images in your mind that are arising spontaneously. And going with like Buddhist philosophy, and also Catholic philosophy to some degree, like when it first arises, then that's, from the Buddhist point of view, that's just the fruition of your own karma. That thoughts that arise in your mind arise through the fruition of karma. So that's just passive. That's happening on its own. But if you grasp that, you know, if you just take the ball and run with it, so to speak, you know, that becomes the beginning of like this chain of associations. You know, you start doing a running commentary on that. Then, of course, you're making new karma. And then, let's see, what's the exact question here? Perception of this seeming independence just be a form of delusion. No, I think that when it first arises, going with Buddhist philosophy and also going with Catholic philosophy, that, I mean, that's just, you're not responsible for that. You have a thought that suddenly pops into your mind of like killing your own mother or some such, then that might be the fruition of unwholesome karma in the past, but still it is ethically neutral, just so long as it's just popping into your mind without any like volitional effort for it to pop into your mind. If you act upon it, then of course, then you're doing karma. So, and the reason why I mentioned Catholics over and over again is St. John of the Cross. I don't know if I've mentioned this. He's one of my favorite Christians. That he was a father confessor at a convent for many years. And his advice to people making confession, like a lot of people, they'd be like hyper conscientious. And so they'd be confessing to him these thoughts that would arise in their minds. And he'd say, the first motion of the thought is not your responsibility. That you are not making it happen. It's just that if you follow through, you continue with the thought, then you might have something to confess. But don't come to me confessing just the first, like, you know, the first flashes of some, like, unwholesome thought. So long as you are not responding to that thought and continuing with it, you haven't done anything wrong. So, yeah, it's like the first thoughts. I mean, what's going on in your mind is just like what's like popping into your mind spontaneously, it seems, in most cases anyway, is the fruition of karma, which is ethically neutral. And so, I mean, that can just happen a lot. And like the wiser you get, the less you will just start just through knee-jerk reflex, just following up on the thought and using that as like the beginning of a chain of association. You know, you just let it arise and pass away, arise and pass away. Like in the Platform Sutra of Hui Neng, Hui Neng says that, one thing that the sage does, he does not allow his thoughts to hook up in sequence. I mean, if you have to, then sure. But as a general rule, you're just sitting there. Your thoughts might just be arising and passing away, but you're not like deliberately forming chains of association. Then it's becoming volitional, and then you're making new karma, which could be akusala karma, which is not good. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from J.K. And J.K. says, even entertaining for 1 second that becoming enlightened and understanding the whole universe was a thing, how could that stop rebirth? Obviously, entertaining that rebirth was a thing also. So, when you become enlightened, you do understand the whole universe in a way. I mean, it's not like you become omniscient necessarily. If you become enlightened, you're not suddenly going to know the cube root of 53. You're not going to know how many hairs are on your head. You're not going to be able to speak fluent Han Chinese if you never learned it before, necessarily. I would be surprised if Gautama Buddha could have spoken fluent Swahili. So, when you become enlightened and understand the whole universe, it's like you're understanding the essence of what this universe is based on. You know, this universe is a kind of mental construction. I mean, the universe that we are experiencing is clearly a mental construction. And so when you understand like the fundamental essence of consciousness, you're understanding the fundamental essence of this mental construction that we call the world. So that's one thing. Becoming enlightened, understanding the whole universe, which is the universe of your own mind. So how could that stop rebirth? Because rebirth relies upon delusion. And when you have like penetrated the delusion and you're no longer deluded, then this karmic force that's driving you through just chronic dissatisfaction, just from one moment to the next, to the next, to the next, that's gone. So, see, how could that stop rebirth? Understanding the universe. It's just, rebirth is just part of this mental construction. And when you transcend the mental construction, then you transcend the phenomena of the mental construction. I mean, you might not be completely removed from it. A fully enlightened being, like arguably Gautama Buddha, is still walking around, talking to people and so forth. It's just that he is no longer identifying with it. He no longer considers it to be ultimate reality because he knows ultimate reality at that point, and he knows that this isn't it. This world of things interacting with each other and having names and all that, that's a mental construction. So, delusion prevents you from knowing reality, and delusion is what causes you to continue existing as a deluded being. So, I mean, it's sort of like waking up from the dream. You know, you wake up from a dream, that stops the dream, doesn't it? So, I'm just going to move on to JK's second question, which is, even accepting that life experience shows that bad actions can indeed snowball into bad consequences, isn't it more convincing that karma is explained as an ancient cultural or religious concept to enforce pro-social behavior rather than being a real thing? Okay, well, the main argument, it seems to me, against this very idea is that the people that were taking karma most seriously in ancient India were not pro-social. I mean, they were abandoning society. They were renouncing society and going off and living alone in forests. So, I mean, if the whole idea of karma was invented for the sake of enforcing pro-social behavior, and this is like a basic staple of atheistic argumentation. I don't know if JK here is an atheist or not, but it's so many people will say, I mean, it's just, to a religious person or a spiritual person, it's just obvious nonsense. It's just silly. But they take very seriously the idea that religion is invented by the upper classes to keep the lower classes in line and under control. But with Buddhism, I mean, it clearly doesn't work that way, because the founder of Buddhism, Gautama Buddha, was encouraging people to renounce society. Jesus of Nazareth allegedly did the same. Renounce society. Sell all that you have, give the money to the poor, and follow me. Take up your cross and all that. So, it's not convincing at all, even if you don't want to believe in karma. But, I mean, this alternate theory is not convincing at all, that karma is explained as an ancient cultural or religious concept to enforce pro-social behavior, since the people that were taking it most seriously were abandoning society. And karma, from the Buddhist point of view, is volition. So, I mean, if you don't want to believe that karma exists, then going with Theravada Buddhism, you wouldn't believe that volition exists. Chaitana, or will. You know, Schopenhauer's will with a capital W. Because karma is not some sort of as yet undiscovered law of physics that it's like bringing into the spiritual or ethical realm this like Newtonian idea of every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That's how I understood it before I was a monk, like when I was like 18 years old. Maybe my early 20s, I believed that it was kind of like this as yet undiscovered law of physics of like a more or less Newtonian idea. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. You do bad things outwardly, bad things will come back to you. But that's really not how karma works. Karma is like the momentum of your mental energy, the momentum of your mental states. And since, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that this world we live in is a kind of mental construction, you have like a dirty, ugly mind, you're going to create a dirty, ugly world. If you have a clean, beautiful mind, you'll have more of a clean, beautiful world. And it may be that they're right next to each other. And so you might say, well, they're both living in the same world, but subjectively they're not. So I guess I should just move on to the next question. This is from Siddhartha Lohachita. And he says, how pannobhasa would define liberty? Although he's not American, so he just uses single quotes instead of double quotes. So how I would define liberty? Well, I guess I would define it in a kind of somewhat indirect manner, like a truly free society. In a truly free society, a person should be allowed to do whatever they want so long as they are not harming anybody else or infringing upon the rights of anybody else. So in a truly free society, public nudity, you know, if you had real genuine liberty, walking around naked probably would not be against the law. Taking drugs, even like really dangerous ones, wouldn't be against the law if you weren't harming anybody else. I mean, if you're like an airline pilot and you're just getting just fucked up on heroin or something right before having to fly, then obviously you would be endangering other people, you know, or drunk driving, for example. So, yeah, I would consider liberty to be the right, I guess, to do what you think is right, to follow your own conscience, to the pursuit of happiness, to engage in the pursuit of happiness, so long as you are not like preventing other people from doing likewise. And I mean, then you get into these sticky issues of, well, what if someone is offended or traumatized from seeing somebody walking naked? Or, you know, you call somebody a name. I mean, do you have the right to state what you consider to be objective facts, say about human biodiversity, and then other people are saying, oh, I feel unsafe. Or you call a transsexual person by their male name when they're insisting that they're a woman now. I mean, in some places that's illegal. But I mean, whether that would be like the right of somebody to call you whatever they want, unless they're like deliberately slandering you, trying to get you in trouble. You know, they're saying that you're a thief when they know full well you're not one. Then that would be different. Yelling fire in a crowded theater, for example. But, so, I mean, there's going to be controversial, like, blurry boundary lines with regard to, you know, how free, I mean, what rights you have that really are or are not infringing upon somebody else's rights. But I think, like, the snowflake types that just complain about everything, they would have to toughen up in a truly free society. You know, they'd have to get used to being called things they don't want to be called. They might have to get used to seeing somebody walking down the street naked. That kind of stuff. So, yeah, liberty would just be being able to follow your conscience in the pursuit of happiness so long as you are not preventing others from doing likewise. And that's kind of libertarian. And I don't think that it is really the wisest kind of political system. That a certain degree of liberty is important, but absolute liberty would be like social chaos, I think, where, I mean, it's good to have certain moral principles that, I mean, like, frowning upon women just being absolutely slutty, for example, or men being absolutely slutty for that matter. Just sort of bringing into the mainstream people who are addicted to drugs or addicted to certain sexual fetishes or kinks, that kind of thing, that it's not good for society, even though technically it's more free. So I do think that a certain amount of shared values, having a value system that helps to stabilize society, is very important or helpful to a society in the Darwinian struggle for existence, so to speak. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is also from Siddhartha Lohachita. He says, your parents, they were from Protestant or Catholic background. Well, both of my parents came from a Southern Baptist background. That my father's father, according to him, me in my previous existence was an ordained Baptist minister, and I've got ordained Baptist ministers on my mother's side of the family too. I've got 2 cousins on my mother's side of the family, at least, who were, still are, I suppose, ordained Baptist ministers. So my background, my ancestral background recently, now over the past few generations, is Southern Baptist. In fact, I think it was my great-grandfather, one of my great-grandfathers on my father's side, his middle name was Baptist. He was John Baptist Reynolds. Or maybe it wasn't Reynolds. Could have been, I don't know, Roach. Could have been Roach. My father's mother's maiden name was Roach. So anyways, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Cherzaskaziz. And Cherzaskaziz is asking, I assume, a joke question here. There was some mention of Bhikkhu Analio on the Discord server. And then Cherzaskaziz here says, what would English-speaking modern Western woman think if they rename her Bhikkhuni Analia? And then he's got A-N-A-L in bold-face type. So apparently he's making some kind of poo-poo pee-pee joke. And I don't fully understand it, to tell you the truth. What would English-speaking modern Western women think? I assume he means instead of woman. If they, being maybe Bhikkhu Analio, changes his name to Bhikkhuni Analia. So it's like, I guess the main point here would be, what would happen if some bhikkhu decides to become trans and starts calling himself a bhikkhuni? Well, I mean, that wouldn't fly in Orthodox Theravada, but then again, in the West, Orthodox Theravada is a kind of dinosaur, I think. At least it is amongst most people who consider themselves to be Theravada Buddhists in the West. So, what would English-speaking modern Western women think if some monk decides that he's really a woman and starts calling himself a bhikkhuni? With, I think we can leave aside ANAL in boldface type as irrelevant to that question. So, different ones would think different things. I think a lot of the sort of Vipassana insight movement would just cheer this person on. It's like they just think that they're stunning and brave. They're just modern day heroes. But from the Orthodox Theravada point of view, and from the point of view of conservative Theravada Buddhists, which do form the majority in this world, even though most of them are in Asia, then it would just, it wouldn't fly at all. And I'm just going to move on to Trzaskaz's second question, which is more of a serious question. He says, our biggest difference for me with your interpretation of Buddhism is that you think one cannot reason or figure out anything about this world we live in. Is true, or am I misunderstanding your position? Well, obviously, I explain a lot of stuff in terms of like empiricism. So with regard to conventional truth, sure, you can figure out all kinds of stuff. You can figure out what gravity is. You can figure out like gas pressures and like the dynamics that influence gas pressures, that kind of thing. You can do mathematics. You can figure out all kinds of stuff. It's just that it's not ultimate truth. You can't figure out ultimate truth. You can figure out all kinds of empirical stuff, though. That's what science is for. So, like biology, that kind of thing, I got no problem with that. I refer to biology a lot, anthropology, math sometimes. So, I think you can reason or figure out empirical stuff about the samsaric world we're living in, clearly. Otherwise, I wouldn't be bringing up science and like scientific explanations for things, or objective explanations for things. In fact, why would I even be answering questions? Well, I guess I could be answering questions without figuring out anything. But, that wouldn't make much sense either, would it? So, yeah, you're never going to understand ultimate truth. You're not going to understand paramata satcha, the highest ultimate truth, by thinking about it. You're never going to figure it out. The closest you can come with regard to that would be something like in Zen, where you just keep trying and trying and trying and trying until finally something snaps and your mind just stops and becomes silent, and then it's like it just shines through the silence. Suddenly your mind is not obscured with all this thinking anymore, and there it is. There it has always been. It's just been covered up by thinking. So if you want to understand samsara, the West has done the best with regard to understanding samsara. They came up with scientific empiricism, which is about the best system devised thus far for just understanding the samsaric environment in which we appear to be living. But to penetrate samsara, you can't use that. To transcend samsara, you're not going to do it by figuring out the highest truth. It just doesn't work that way. And I'm just going to move on to Trzaskaz's third question. What about my postcard? It's been 2 months already since I posted it. I didn't get the postcard. I've got 2 other postcards from Trzaskaz's, which are up there on the bookcase, including the weird-shaped one, which must have been like an early attempt at postcards in his native land. There have been significant improvements in the shape of postcards since then. But this third postcard that presumably I would guess was for my birthday, I just didn't get it. And whether it's because the postal service in Poland, whatever country he comes from is not so good. Or it could be that America, in its decline, has a postal service that is declining in its reliability. Like in Burma, you just don't send anything valuable in the mail. You just don't do it. I was going to send a key in the mail once. I was advised sternly, do not send that key in the mail. You're better off finding a bus driver who's going there and then giving it to the bus driver with some money, and then in good faith he will pass it on and it'll get there. It's called a Lujon in Burma. So, yeah, it may happen. It may still arrive. I remember in Burma once I got a letter from my mother, I think more than a year after she sent it. And the American Postal Service hasn't degenerated to the point that it is on a par with the Burmese Postal Service, which is almost totally unreliable. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. And this is from Arpad. And Arpad is a Frenchman who I recently learned actually eats popcorn with a spoon. I mean, the French, they've always had a reputation for being kind of decadent, at least in modern times or later modern times. But eating popcorn with a spoon is pushing it. But Arpad says, are there any aspects of Jainism that you think are accurate or find appealing? Well, that's kind of a tough question. Jainism does have, as a philosophy, what is called Syadvada, or it's called other things too. I mentioned this in a previous Q&A recently, where, according to the Jains, everything has an infinite number of aspects or qualities. Only a fully enlightened Tirthankara can understand this. Like a fully enlightened Jain can see all of the qualities simultaneously. But those of us who are still wallowing in samsara, we can't see even most of the qualities and aspects of a thing. And so in order to be rigorously, what's the word? Not precise, accurate, rigorously accurate, you should always throw in siyad in a sentence, which means kind of, or in a sense. So in a sense, this is true. In a sense, this isn't true. And as a philosophy, it's pretty much useless, other than just bearing in mind that you're never going to be able to speak the whole truth. You're never going to be able to know the whole truth unless you're a fully enlightened being. But having to throw kinda into every single sentence is just not really a pragmatic, useful kind of approach to human knowledge. See, with regard to Jainism, I can't really think offhand of any way that Jainism comes closer to ultimate truth than Buddhism, other than maybe that Syadvada thing. Whereas in Abhidhamma, for example, Orthodox Theravada, they do think that you can explain ultimate truth. And I think the Jains may have been a little bit more wise in that particular regard. But there is, I have read some Jain sutras, and there is this one thing that has stuck in my mind for years. I read this book in college. I was going through Max Muller's Sacred Books of the East series when I was in college. And I was reading some Jain sutras. I think they were translated by a fellow named Jacobi or Jacobi. I don't know how to pronounce whatever country he comes from. I think he was Swedish or something. And a Jain, if he's going to cross a river, I think I've mentioned this before. You got a Jain monk who's going to cross a river. There's no bridge. There's no regular ferry. But there's a guy in a boat who's willing to take the Jain across the river. The Jain is not allowed to accept if the boat's going to cross just for his sake. If they were already going to cross, there's already people on the boat, and he can get on board, that's fine. But if the boat guy is just going to take him across just as a favor to him, a Jain is forbidden because he's making karma by doing that. A Jain should not do anything that makes karma. or at least as little as possible that makes karma. So, I mean, there's all these rules about, like, I mean, it's even mentioned in the Buddhist texts also that a Jain should not accept alms from someone who is willing to offer him food, but there's a hungry dog standing there, or even if there's lots of flies buzzing around, because by accepting that food and eating it himself, he might be depriving that dog or those flies of a meal, and he'd be making karma by doing that. So anyways, getting back to the boat, the boat guy was going to cross the river anyway. The Jain gets on unobtrusively. Jains have to be unobtrusive for the sake of karma, because, I mean, I'll get to that. So anyways, he gets across, and according to the sutra, if the boat starts to sink, the Jain is not allowed to help bail out the boat, because that would be making karma. So what he's supposed to do if the boat starts to sink, the boat is taking on water. If he's the kind of monk, or the kind of Jain monk that wears clothes, then he's supposed to take off his clothes, fold them up, and put them onto his head, because when the pissed off boat owner throws him overboard for not helping to bail out the boat, his robes won't get wet. That's just stuck in my mind for all these decades since I read it in college. But getting back to just basic Jain philosophy is like, karma is like this substance, this sticky substance. In fact, Ajahn Thanisaro claims that the Buddhist term asava comes from the Jains. It was like borrowed from the Jains. Instead of borrowing it from the Brahmins, that particular term asava was borrowed from the Jains, and it's like something that flows in and sticks to you. And so the Jains believe that karma sticks to your jiva, or your soul, weighs it down so it can't float up into heaven. So you have to exhaust all of your karma, not create any new karma, bad or good, and just exhaust the karma you've already got, partly just through like passive self-torture, eating only once a week, this kind of stuff. And so, I mean, there's a simplicity, like an elegance to it. I mean, it's very straightforward, very simple. You just exhaust your karma, don't create any new karma, and then you float upwards. Your jiva floats upwards. But, I mean, it's interesting from an anthropological point of view. It's kind of entertaining. But with regard to, like, the wisdom of the system, I do think that Buddhism is a better system in pretty much every respect, except for like the Abhidhamma stuff. And the Jains really didn't have very many scholars. I've mentioned this in previous Q&As also, where they were just hardcore ascetics, and they didn't have enough monks just memorizing texts because they weren't written down in ancient India. It was just ancient Indian tradition, sacred texts especially, you memorize. You just memorize it by heart. And the Jains just didn't have enough scholars to just memorize. And so they lost their version of the Tipitaka twice. They had to have like a great council where they would kind of cobble together all that remained, trying to fill in the gaps to some degree. But I've completely wandered away from the question. And so I think I'm just going to move on to this question. This is from Nirmit. And Nirmit says, is it true that Adi Shankaracharya was a major reason for Buddhism's decline in India? And Shankaracharya was like, in a way, he was sort of like the founding father of Advaita Vedanta. So, I mean, it's possible that Shankaracharya was a kind of reason for Buddhism's decline simply because he was borrowing ideas from Madhyamaka Buddhists and sort of Hinduizing it. So he was taking some advanced Buddhist philosophy to some degree and just incorporating that into Hinduism so Hinduism could compete philosophically better with the Buddhists. I mean, when it was just like Vedism, it was relatively crude philosophically. And so the Buddhists really, I mean, they could win debates pretty easily. But then when somebody like Shankara comes along and, adds sophisticated philosophy to the Hindu side, then there's more competition, which would then weaken Buddhism. But I mean, it wasn't the main reason. I think the main reasons for Buddhism decline in India, first of all, of course, you had the Muslim Turks just genociding Indian Buddhists in ancient times, one of the largest genocides in history that almost never gets mentioned, at least not in the West. That would be Islamophobic. But also, Buddhism was becoming more and more esoteric, just tantric, and relying upon like Buddhist universities and so forth, that the average layperson living in a village just could not relate to it as much. You know, it was just so far beyond them, they couldn't really relate to it. And so Buddhism kind of lost some footing in India because of that. And just some of the weird tantric ideas were just getting really out there. You know, they were just sort of pushing it, sort of like progressivism in the West. The postmodern West has just gone so far that it's just losing the common person. You know, it's just sort of like this fanatical fringe that still takes it seriously at this point. So, yeah, I do think it's possible that Shankara, just through sort of adapting Madhyamaka Buddhist ideas, and I mean, he had to have been influenced by Buddhism, even if just his own inherent wisdom. I mean, he was considered to be fully enlightened since he was a child. So, I mean, it could be that he was a sage also that just spontaneously, you know, realized certain things. But then he could like take certain philosophical concepts from Buddhism and just sort of transplant them into the nascent, you know, proto-Hinduism, which then strengthened Hinduism and sort of, relatively speaking, weakened Buddhism. So that's possible. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from OFM. And OFM says, what's your take on mind essence, direct path Buddhist Mahamudra teachings in India that apparently carried over to Tibetan Vajrayana? Well, I mean, I kind of was touching on that sort of thing just a few moments ago with, this is just sort of getting into the tantric kind of esoteric stuff that the average lay Buddhist in India just could not relate to anymore. I mean, it was just beyond them. But mind essence, I mean, in a way that kind of contradicts earlier Buddhism in that nothing in samsara has an essence. And I mean, you get out of samsara and essence doesn't even mean anything anymore. So, but aside from that, I'm really no expert on like Tibetan Buddhism, tantric Buddhism. I've never really had much interest in it. It became fairly obvious very early on that the historical Gautama Buddha didn't teach it. And my main interest, or one of my main interests as a Buddhist and as a monk for 30 years, was to find out as well as I could what Gautama Buddha taught. Because if I was a Buddhist, I want to follow what the Buddha taught. I don't want to follow a bunch of made up stuff that arose centuries later. I didn't want to just follow along with Burmese tradition or Thai tradition. I mean, I wanted to know what the Buddha taught, and I wanted to follow it as well as I could. And it became pretty obvious very early on, Vajrayana or Mahamudra, this kind of stuff. I mean, it has certain elements of early Buddhism, but for the most part, it leaves like the original teachings of Gautama Buddha behind, or it just incorporates so much other stuff, you know, this later additions, that it just dilutes down the original message of Gautama Buddha. And I just didn't have much interest in that. I didn't even have much interest in like Abhidhamma, which is Theravada Buddhist, the third Pitaka. Most Western monks just don't have any use for it. They'll just reject it or just ignore it. So, yeah, I say so an awful lot. It's like a filler. Every language has its filler particles. So is one in English, I guess. And I almost said so again just now. What's your take? Some people say basically, that kind of thing a lot too. I used to do that until somebody pointed out to me that basically is just another meaningless filler for the most part. So, my take on mind essence direct path Buddhist Mahamudra teachings in India that apparently carried over into Tibetan Vajrayana, in a way it was just progressive Buddhism it still had like profound wisdom in it, but it was deviating so far from what the Buddha taught, or what like most like reasonable kind of spiritual seekers can really wrap their head around or fully appreciate, I guess. That it's just kind of gone overboard in my opinion. I mean, if you really don't care what the Buddha really taught, then you can just follow any system and call yourself a Buddhist, and that's fine. You know, that's just the way you choose to do it. That's okay with me. But I mean, if you're on my Discord server and are insisting that the Buddha taught like whatever, just, you know, some obviously later Mahayana concept, then you might get pushback. But this kind of stuff, I mean, it's got its own wisdom. I'm sure it does. There may be fully enlightened Mahamudra Buddhists out there, or at least historically, but it has deviated too far from what the historical Gautama Buddha originally taught for it to be of any great interest to me, other than just kind of historical or anthropological interest. Maybe to some degree, a kind of triangulation. That's been one of the main benefits I have gotten from studying other philosophies and religious systems, especially like advanced philosophies and religious systems, is it allows a kind of triangulation. What is it that sages in different parts of the world agree upon? That kind of thing. And then you take that more seriously than a one-off. You know, you've got this one sage in like Italy or like China or wherever that is saying this one unique thing that is at odds with others, then you might be a little more skeptical of that. But then again, Gautama Buddha had his own unique teachings like no self, one of the few spiritual systems that rejects the idea of an eternal soul. So you just have to be careful. Let's see here. I guess I answered that one. So I'm just going to move on to the next one, the next question, which is from No Juice. And No Juice says, if someone loses focus on Dhamma and finds themselves sucked into samsara, what can they do to correct themselves and return to grounding their mind in Dhamma? Not necessarily living an actively evil or nihilistic life, but forgetting Dhamma as an active factor, coloring their perception and mental states. I feel that I tend to go through prolonged cycles between spiritual mindfulness and mental immersion in the world. Well, note it. Like, you suddenly notice that you're just wallowing in samsara. You note it. And as soon as you note it, you're not wallowing in samsara anymore. The noting of the wallowing and the wallowing itself, they're incompatible. You know, they're mutually exclusive. So you're wallowing in samsara. When you note that you're wallowing in samsara, like you're pissed off and all of a sudden you become mindful of being pissed off, then you have transcended it in a sense. You've separated it. You're not wallowing in it anymore because you're just the observer in a sense. You know, if you're anything at all, you're the one doing the observing and not the thing being observed. So anything that you can observe, it's not you and it's not ultimately real. And so you're wallowing in samsara. Suddenly you notice you're wallowing in samsara. That's it. You've cured yourself for that moment at least. So, I mean, Mahasi teachers of the Mahasi method, I mean, for them, this would just be like an obvious answer. Just note it. Note it. Note it. Note it. And it's a lot of Mahasi teachers, even the really advanced ones, just about any question you have any problem in your meditation, any kind of weird phenomenon in your meditation, any kind of stumbling block or anything like that, the most usual, most likely answer you're going to get is note it. And that, I mean, in a way, it's like a panacea. So it might not resolve the problem, but at least you are detached from the problem. The problem isn't you anymore. So if you're wallowing in samsara or sucked into samsara, to the extent that you know that, you're not sucked into samsara anymore. It's like One of my favorite verses of the Dhammapada, the fool who is aware of his foolishness is at least wise to that extent. But the fool who considers himself wise is called a fool indeed. So if you know that you're getting sucked into samsara sometimes, that's at least you're wise to that extent. And the more you are aware of that, just be mindful of it. And to the extent that you're mindful of it, you're not wallowing in it anymore. You're not sucked into samsara anymore to the extent that you are noting and aware of it. And it's sort of like meditation. It's like you note it and then you kind of like stray back into samsaric modes of being. And then as soon as you're aware of that, you just note it again. And it's like bringing back the meditation to the breath or whatever. So in a way, it's pretty much just like meditation on a grand scale. As soon as you notice you're deviating from Dhamma or just being in the present moment or being mindful or whatever, then you just note it and come back to the center, so to speak. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Liberlam. And he says, would you ever breed poison dart frogs? No, I'm really not into raising frogs. I mean, if I were going to raise amphibians, definitely I would choose salamanders over frogs. I prefer salamanders to frogs. Nothing against frogs. I am not a frogophobe, anything like that. But I just like salamanders better. I had a few salamanders when I was a kid. I kept one in a big brandy snifter, and you drop an earthworm into it, and that salamander would just like attack that worm, and it'd be like rolling around in the water with it, like it was like an alligator attacking a snake or something. So no on the poison dart frogs. I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Xenothoid. And Xenothoid says, apparently getting a Buddha tattoo is against the law in some places. Did you ever see people with Buddha tattoos in Asia? No, I can't say that I ever saw anyone with a Buddha tattooed on their arm or leg or whatever in Burma. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but usually they have Buddhist symbols. They can have Buddhist symbols, but more likely it's going to be more of a traditional Burmese, pretty much like animistic or alchemical kind of tattoos, or it's just going to be ornamental. For some reason, you can see Buddhist monks in Burma with like a big scorpion on their leg, that kind of thing. I knew this one Buddhist monk in Burma, Burmese monk. He had a university degree in English, but his body was just covered with tattoos, and they were all like magical tattoos, like to protect him from witchcraft and snake bites. And it was just sort of like runes, like Burmese runes all over him. So, I mean, one thing this question did remind me of, though, is like around 2000, after 2011, after Burma opened up to like Western capitalism, the sanctions were released because they pretended to stop having a military government and all that. So there was a fellow from New Zealand, I think. And I mean, after 2011, there was just this flood of Westerners coming into Burma, just looking around for ways to make money. It's just a new untapped resource. Just capitalism hasn't really gotten its roots in here yet. We're gonna make a mint. So, anyways, this New Zealand guy, he sets up a nightclub in Rangoon, and he puts out an advertisement of the Buddha wearing stereo headphones, and the Burmese government promptly arrested this guy and threw him into prison for sacrilege, I guess. And I knew a few people that were thinking that's really pushing it. I mean, that's going too far. But for me, I mean, they were making an example of him, and I think they may have been justified. You've got all these irreligious Westerners flooding into the most devoutly Buddhist country in the world, probably, and they're just like showing the Buddha with stereo headphones on, just being irreligious. And the government was just saying, we don't put up with that shit in this country. You want to do that shit, go back to New Zealand, go back to America, England, wherever. You're not doing it here. And so I could appreciate it to some degree. I mean, he was just an unfortunate example. He fucked around and he found out. But I bet not very many people put out similar advertisements after that happened. The problem was solved, essentially. So, yeah, but no on the Buddha tattoos. For some reason, I do not recall seeing a Buddha tattoo on any tattooed person in Asia. So, there's one other thing, though. When I was in Japan, I spent a rains retreat in Japan, like in 1997, and somebody gave us Buddha cookies. There were cookies shaped like the Buddha. And, I mean, in Burma, people would be afraid to eat these. You know, it's just, they would not sell at all. But, I mean, I ate mine, but it's like, there was definitely like this twinge of, should I really be doing this when I'm like biting the head off of a Buddha cookie? But I'm just going to move on to Xenothoid's next question here. What is the general attitude toward tattoos in Theravada countries? Well, the only country I can really speak of based on years of experience is Burma. And I've already mentioned, a lot of people have tattoos in Burma. Even like, I mean, it's not like in America where, you know, there's people just like tats all over them, sleeve tattoos. It's mostly guys. Every once in a while, you'll see a woman that just has like, I knew this one village woman who had like 3 dots tattooed on her wrist. And she went to like a fair or a festival or something. And there was this tattoo person. I don't know if you call them an artist, if they're just doing 3 dots. But this tattooist was giving like protection tattoos. And maybe the 3 dots just represent Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha or some such thing. You know, it's just a very subtle Buddhist kind of tattoo, not a Buddha, but it was like had this protective quality to it. And I mean, it's not just a recent thing because there's less tattoos now than there were before the British took over Burma. Because like in the 1800s, it was just the standard practice for men to be completely tattooed from the knee to the hips. And it would almost all be covered up by their sarong. But if they lift up their sarong to cross a river or something, Tom Pulisiata was like this. If he would lift up his robes to like wade across a stream or something, you would see that his upper legs were just completely covered with tattoos. Just, you know, like a sleeve kind of tattoo. Also, I have read that in the 1800s or very early 20th century, that it was a fashion in Burma for men to get the top of their penis slit open and like little jingle bells, I think they're called chu in Burmese, like implanted into their penis so that their penis would have like this jingly lump under the skin. Although I guess I could have like refrained from mentioning that part. But yeah, tattoos were really a big deal in Burma. That, for example, I've read somewhere that burglars, thieves in particular, would get a tattoo of a yawning cat on their thigh, which presumably made them like jump higher and be faster and this kind of thing. And like I've already mentioned, a lot of protection tattoos. Like there's a kind of runic symbol thing in Burma called an in. It looks like a tic-tac-toe board. And then a few of the spaces on the tic-tac-toe board would have like obscure little marks. And there's a kind of alchemy in Burma that is based on ins. You know, there's different kind of alchemists in Burma. You've got iron alchemists and mercury alchemists, mantra alchemists, and you got the in alchemist that specializes in these weird symbolic figures. So there's a lot of that kind of thing, you know, tattoos to protect you from witchcraft and snake bites and that kind of thing. And then some are just ornamental, but they're very common among men, possibly more common than in the modern West, where tattoos, even virgins get tattoos in the West now, which is kind of strange. So let's see here. General attitude toward tattoos in Theravada countries. Again, I can only speak about Burma, and it was well established in Burmese culture, even more than now in the past. Also, I think it was in Thailand that there was certain hill tribes. Maybe it was in Burma, where among certain hill tribes, maybe it was the Chin in Burma, where the girls would get their faces tattooed, just like covered their faces with tattoos, like some kind of Mexican gang member. That was, the purpose of that was to make them less attractive to the local lords who might want to include them in their harems, just like recruit them against their will to live in the big house and wear pretty dresses and so forth. So yeah, it's common in Southeast Asia as a general rule, pretty sure. So I'm just going to move on to Xenothoid's third tattoo question. Have you ever considered getting a tattoo of anything related to Buddhism? And really, I have not. I've never really wanted to get a tattoo. It's like my skin is like the top of the jar of peanut butter before you've scooped any out. You know, it just seems a shame to mar this pristine surface, so to speak. But I used to have this idea of just getting the Om symbol, which is more Hindu than Buddhist. There is Om in Buddhism, so I guess it could qualify here, kind of on the borderline. But I was considering just getting the Om symbol, maybe on my ankle or just like over my left shoulder blade. But that would be about as close to a Buddhist tattoo that I've ever considered. And my woman wants us to get matching tattoos, and I'm just kind of resisting it because I don't have any tattoos at all. It seems like if I ever decide to take up a life of crime, having identifying marks might be a bad idea. And it's like you're just stuck with it. You know, you get a tattoo, you're just stuck with it for the rest of your life. You might decide it was a bad idea a year later. Too bad for you. You can get lasers on it or something that will at least make it fade. My father had one tattoo on his body. It was in block letters on his forearm. It said, "Lest I forget." And I think he had it done on VE Day when he was a soldier in World War II, and he got really stinking drunk one time, celebrating that the Allies had won, and he got that tattooed on his arm. That's one story. I think on another occasion he said there was a different reason for it, but he never told me what the different reason was, so I'm just going with the VE Day one. And I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Robert. And Robert says, what do you think of the Gnostics? Well, I really don't know that much about the Gnostics, and what little I know, I'm just not very much impressed. You know, the Gnostics, I'm just the stereotypical Gnostic who rides a GNU, is bitten by gnats so that he's gnashing his teeth in frustration. The typical Gnostic, stereotypical, I mean, they believe that the world is like evil. And I mean, that's even more than Buddhism. Buddhism says it's suffering. You know, this world is dukkha. It's on fire, so forth. But the Gnostics took it a step farther, it seems to me. That it's like, this is a bad place, and you need to just dissociate from worldliness as much as you can. Just the flesh is just bad. And it just seems, it's more negative. I mean, a lot of people say Buddhism is negative, but Gnosticism seems to have taken it even farther into a realm that I consider to be relatively unhealthy, but I'm no authority on the Gnostics. I mean, they had some influence on early Christianity. I've read that the Gospel according to John was composed largely for the sake of refuting certain Gnostic sects that had gained prominence in the early 2nd century of the Common Era. I think the Gospel according to Thomas, which I like, I wish that it had been included in the New Testament instead of John. I think that was partly Gnostic in origin. It may have been a gospel that was accepted by the Gnostics, but not by more mainstream, more Catholic kind of Christians. And the Gnostics, they just took the ball and ran with it with regard to like classifying angels and so forth, which doesn't strike me as useful in any degree. I mean, the Buddhists kind of do that with regard to devas and brahmas, but I mean, it's not really important to me. I don't see how that's going to help you to wake up. So what little I know about the Gnostics, I mean, they seem to have gone deeper than like mainstream Christians. I don't think they would have gone deeper than like contemplative monastics in Orthodox Christianity or Catholicism. But I mean, because I mean, once you get a certain point, I mean, you're a heavy hitter, and it's, you know, once you become like a really advanced mystic, you're not going to get much more advanced than that. So I assume the Gnostics, there was a lot of wisdom, like the Pseudo-Dionysius. I don't know if he was a Gnostic, but I'm sure the Gnostics liked him. You know, they may have had more of a mystical leaning, but two things about them that, I mean, I kind of understand or at least believe is, one, that they were just overly negative towards this world. You know, just sort of like aversion, dosa towards this world, which is not like a balanced point of view, it seems to me. And second, just this extreme classification of different archons and levels of angels and so forth that, I mean, it's just like complete mythology at that point. But I'm sure they had like advanced practices. They probably had like very wise Gnostic sages and so forth. But those aren't really the ones that you learn a lot about in history books. And that's like the only place I've learned about Gnostics for the most part is just like history books about like early Christianity or the late Roman Empire, that kind of thing. So I'm just going to move on to Robert's second question. Do you have any opinions on the Sufis? Well, I have read that Muhammad, peace be upon him, would have just vehemently disapproved of the Sufis. That Muhammad was very, I mean, the Islam that he taught was very this worldly, even though, you know, there's an emphasis on heaven and so forth that like Old Testament, like proto-Judaism doesn't have. You know, he might be a little more spiritual than Old Testament Judaism, but still he was pretty much in and of the world. And so the Sufis, I'm pretty sure, were influenced by India. I'm no authority on the Sufis. I know that they have adopted certain Buddhist ideas. They even adopted like Buddhist stories. Like there's a story from, I think it's the Dhammapada commentary, that also is included in like an old Sufi book of stories. So there obviously has been some influence from Buddhism and probably Hinduism also on Sufism, and that's probably where they get their mysticism, you know, their meditative techniques, or at least the original idea for meditative techniques. I'm sure that there have been sages, like very spiritually advanced people all over the world in all religions, they just happen to be born there. You know, they just have this innate talent, and, you know, they're just stuck with this religion that, you know, everyone around them follows, and if you don't follow it, then you get killed or something. I mean, there are places and times in history like that, like 16th century Spain, for example. So I do think that Sufism was it started off as a kind of Eastern Islam, probably in Persia, like, what's that area? Arachosia? Like, it's sort of like on the frontier between northwestern India and southeastern Iran or Persia, that had a lot of Buddhism there. And then, of course, it was part of the Persian Empire for a long time. And so there'd be, after Muslim Islam took over, you know, there'd be like some cultural influence. And, you know, cultural influence just through invasion of India also later on. So I do think that Sufism is like Islam that got a little bit more sophisticated through incorporating certain Buddhist and Hindu ideas and practices. And aside from that, there is some Sufism that, Like whirling dervishes, I don't have much use for, but some of the crazy wisdom of some of the Sufi masters. I remember there's reading about this one Sufi master who would just do like weird backwards stuff. I guess the Dakota Indians or Lakota Indians of the plains in the United States, they had this one member of the tribe who would do everything the opposite. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's like he'd fall madly in love with the ugliest, most foul-tempered woman in the village, and he'd ride his horse backwards, and he'd just laugh uproariously if the chief died, this kind of thing. There were certain Sufi masters that were like that. And there's this one story that sticks in my mind of this Sufi master who's like at a marketplace sitting next to a pile of hot chilies, and he's just eating one chili pepper after another, just tears streaming down his face. His face is just beet red. He's obviously in a serious amount of discomfort from eating these hot peppers. Somebody finally asked him, "Why are you doing this?" And he's, I keep eating them just hoping to get a sweet one. And, they're making some kind of crazy wisdom kind of teaching out of it, which it kind of appeals to me. I can kind of appreciate that sort of thing, but still, I don't see what the point of favoring Sufism would be when you can just get the purer source of the best of Sufism farther east. So I'm just going to move on to Robert's third question, which is, which of the mystic traditions outside of Buddhism do you consider to come closest to getting it right? Well, getting what right? A mystic tradition would have like two different levels. There would be the level of mysticism, and then there'd be like the level of like theory. And a mystic, if he's an advanced mystic, like I've already been mentioning, like Saint John of the Cross, here we go again. He really was a master of fourth jhana. He was like an advanced heavy hitter mystic, but he lived in 16th century Spain. He had no choice but to be a Catholic or to be a heretic burned at the stake. Those were his two choices. So he was a Catholic, and he entered a contemplative order, the Carmelites. His mentor was Saint Teresa of Avila, who was also like an advanced mystic, even though she apparently was a little bit nutty. But still, those aren't mutually exclusive. So, with regard to the actual mysticism of just getting into contemplative states where you're wide awake and not thinking anything, then, just about any mystical tradition can have that. At least in like gifted, talented individuals. But with regard to the theory surrounding that mysticism, none of it's going to be very good, because mystical enlightenment or mystical illumination cannot be explained in words, and you're just going to be using cultural conditioning and so forth as a way of just jerry-rigging some theoretical framework to explain it. And none of it is really of any great value with regard to explaining it. Even Buddhism, like there are some serious Buddhists, Jnanavira, the existentialist, eccentric English monk who lived in Ceylon in the 50s and 60s, he just hated mysticism. He just utterly despised it. He just vehemently insisted that there's no such thing as that mysticism is just bullshit. And I think a lot of Orthodox, devout Theravada Buddhists would not consider Theravada to be a mystical tradition. It's pretty clear to me, if you read like the Atthaka Vagga, or what jhana is, that's pretty damn mystical. And just, the ways of explaining it they're always going to fall short. So this is a hard question for me to answer. Which mystical traditions outside Buddhism come closest to getting it right? Getting it right just means being in an advanced mystical state, because none of the theories are going to get it right. All the theories are going to be invalid. And there have been mystics in just about every tradition, probably, Sufism included. And there could be just completely non-religious people who just have mystical experiences, either through a near-death experience or whatever. Some of them might not ever try to even explain it. So this is a tough question. This might be the most difficult question I've been asked on this Q&A. Which of the mystical traditions outside Buddhism come closest to getting it right? I think all of them do, at least with regard to the actual practice of mysticism. I mean, Christianity, I don't know, it's like exceptional Christians in certain periods, like 16th century Spain. There were a lot of heavy-hitting mystics in 16th century Spain. But nowadays, I don't know. Meister Eckhart was another one of these really advanced Christian mystics, but some people say Paul of Tarsus was a mystic, and I mean, his mysticism based on his epistles does not seem to be extremely advanced, or at least he doesn't mention anything extremely advanced. I mean, he does have like this one epistle where he's kind of making this innuendo about this stuff that he experienced that was so, so exalted, but I mean, his personality doesn't really reflect that. Then you have the pseudo-Dionysius, who started off as a pagan, and then or so I've read, some Byzantine emperor bans the philosophical academies or schools of Athens. They're just pretty much like clamping down on paganism. Then the pseudo-Dionysius just, for whatever reasons, converted to Christianity and started introducing relatively advanced mysticism into Christianity. So getting it right really would just be having as pure of a mystical experience as possible, which is just wide awake, not thinking anything, no perceptual explanation, commentary, anything like that. And I guess I better just move on to the next question. And this is our last questioner. By golly, I think I'm getting a little more concise, even though I still digress all over the place. But we did have slightly fewer questions than usual this time, and some of them were relatively easy to answer. Anyways, our next and last questioner is Fred. And Fred says, when the body is dispersed, is the mind stream capable of storing previous memories? Golly. Yeah, well, going with Theravada Buddhism, as soon as the body is dispersed, you get a new body. So, I mean, there's not even a single moment when you have the mind stream without a body, unless you're like in a formless realm, which is an extremely advanced heaven realm. But aside from that, I mean, you go from dying person to fertilized egg just immediately. No gap in between other than just the tiniest, fraction of a trillionth of a second in between the flashes of these moments. And then the mental states aren't there either during that tiniest, infinitesimal little gap. So, is the mind stream capable of storing previous memories without a body? Gosh, that's really a theoretical question, because personally, I don't recall not having a body and storing previous memories in my mind stream while not having that body. But theoretically, I don't think it would be absolutely necessary to have a body in order to have a mind and a mind stream. There are presumably just like spirit beings that don't have a physical body. Although in Theravada Buddhism, generally, the explanation for that, like ghosts and so forth, is that they do have a body. It's just that their body is made of a different kind of matter than ours. So that we don't see them, they generally don't see us. And so, I mean, we could be like in the same room together and not even know it. But just theoretically, going with the idea that anything is possible, I don't see why in some version of reality, somewhere, somehow, you have got minds that don't rely upon a brain, that you just have like this, I don't know, I mean, it could just be like some kind of resonating, pulsing energy or something that has enough structure to it, some sort of geometric stability or some such, that, I mean, it doesn't need a brain. It's mind only, I suppose. And yeah, I don't see why it would be impossible in theory. Let's just put it that way. With regard to humans, then, I mean, you don't have a body without a mind. You don't have a mind without a body. They're together. Namarupa, at least according to Orthodox Theravada. So I'm just going to move on to Fred's next question, which is, what is the purpose of previous memories when they can be bogus recollections and bias? Well, I mean, there's not really a purpose. I mean, it's just sort of like a side effect, or it's like I've watched a lot of ghost shows, like paranormal reality shows where paranormal investigators, which usually they're not, they're just like making a show to make money, just playing up, oh, I got a weird feeling just now, this kind of shit. That at least, I mean, according to the theory, that some haunted houses may really have intelligent spirits like haunting that house, but a lot of so-called haunted houses just have like this residual energy, like residual emotional imprints in the house that cause sort of like apparitions that really just are doing the same thing every time. It's just, you just see this apparition of the lady in white walking down the hall, and that's all she ever does. It's just sort of like this imprint in the Akashic record or something of her. Just, she had some emotionally intense experience. Maybe her child just died or something. And so it just somehow imprinted that energy into the house somehow. And I mean, what is the purpose of it? There's no purpose. It just happens. It's like this residual side effect. And like a child remembering a past life, then, I mean, it's not really a purpose. I mean, maybe there could be some kind of Darwinian survival value to that. I don't know what it would be. Some sort of like racial memory or something. I'm not sure. But I mean, this kind of reminds me of one time I was working on a commercial fishing vessel, a factory trawler in the Bering Sea long ago, and I was the biologist on board. And so one of these guys working on the ship asked me, what is the purpose of a jellyfish? And it's like, the purpose of a jellyfish is to stay alive long enough to make baby jellyfishes. There's not really a purpose. So what is the purpose of previous memories when they can be bogus recollections, bias? I mean, the easiest answer is there is no purpose. It's just kind of like this residual side effect that happens sometimes. And there's not necessarily a purpose there. If there was like this valuable purpose, then it might just happen to pretty much everybody, instead of just being this like rare phenomenon of children, especially small children, especially, who insist that they were this other person who died and then became them. And I think most, if not all, but most like past life regressions are just kind of bogus recollections and bias, like Fred here says. It's just, you get hypnotized, and then they say, go back to your previous existence. And it could just be like subconscious imagination, just dreaming up this past life that never happened. I assume a lot of cases are like that. Even like Pa'alt Doya, Pa'alt Sayadaw, specialized in teaching jhana or like samatha meditation, unlike most meditation teachers in Burmese traditions who teach like mindfulness, satipatthana. Pa'alt Sayadaw, I mean, he was really into jhana. And I mean, he was more orthodox than somebody like Mahasi Sayadaw. I mean, he was more according to the text and what is like genuine orthodox Theravada Buddhist theory. And I mean, some of his examples of success stories, like there was this one female meditator who had a past life regression of being a royal white elephant who, as a result of the merit of offering a flower to a pagoda, got reborn as a human. And to a Burmese person who takes that kind of stuff seriously, I mean, they don't question it. It's like, wow, that's profound. But to a Westerner capable of critical thought, you know, it's like, why would an elephant offer a flower to a pagoda and have this wish of being reborn as a human, and then have the wish fulfilled through the merit of offering a flower to a bell-shaped pile of bricks? So, yeah, what is the purpose of previous memories? For the most part, there is no purpose. It just is like this unusual, largely paranormal, sort of liminal experience that is sort of going against purpose. You know, it's just like this, not exactly random, but it's just like this quirky side effect that comes up sometimes. Slips through the cracks of the rules of this version of samsara. So I'm just going to move on to Fred's third question, which is the last question of the evening or the morning. I guess it technically is morning. No, it isn't. It's not even tomorrow yet. Golly. This is a late one though. The fish tank's the light's gonna turn off at any time now. So, Fred's last question: why is the ego pernicious and self-depreciating? I'm not exactly sure what self-depreciating means. I guess he's saying, why is the ego pernicious, and also why is the ego self-depreciating, which I assume means something like not beneficial. So yeah, that's why is the ego not beneficial? Let's just kind of simplify the question. And the ego is not beneficial largely because it's based on delusion. I mean, the ego is the belief, it is the conceit I am, which is the root of all suffering. Like that's a statement it's in the Atthakavagga. I'm pretty sure. This may not be an exact quote, but it's like the conceit I am is the root of all suffering. So, I mean, that's one reason why the ego is not beneficial. It's based on delusion. And so, I mean, if you're deluded, you're going to suffer. I mean, if you transcend the ego, you realize that the ego is just sort of taking a tiny, infinitesimally small fraction of infinity and trying to turn that into reality and ignore all the rest of infinity, then yeah, it's going to be incomplete. It's going to be unsatisfying, based on delusion and ignorance. And it's just, I mean, the ego has to perpetuate itself. It's just sort of built into egos. It's like Darwinian evolution, where the struggle for survival, I mean, all beings fear death, for example, or at least any being that feels fear. I mean, you might have animals that are so primitive they don't have any fear at all. I think insects may be that way, despite the fact that they may get out of the way of a slapping hand. But, I mean, there has to be this desire to keep going, and this desire is suffering. Desire is the cause of all suffering. So in order to have an ego, you pretty much have to suffer. You have to be delusional, and you have to be unhappy, at least not fully satisfied. So the more ego you've got, the more samsaric you are, the more delusional you are, at least in certain respects. And delusion results in suffering. The ego, through its desire to perpetuate itself, this desire to continue existing, it's pretty much at odds with reality. It's going to lose the battle sooner or later. No matter how hard you try to stay alive, sooner or later you're going to fail. And the harder you try, it's like the more dissatisfied and worried and stressed and everything you're going to be. So the more ego you have, the more kind of isolation you've got also. You know, it's like alienation from the rest of samsara at the very least. And also it's just like alienation from reality. So there's lots of reasons why the ego is pernicious. I mean, really, the ego is based on delusion. From the Buddhist point of view, there is no self. So the belief that you are a self, it's putting you at odds with reality. And when you're at odds with reality, you lose because reality always wins. And I suppose I might as well just stop here. Like I should always say at the beginning, and only did once to my recollection, if you have any questions you think I can answer, then go ahead and ask those particular questions, and I will do my best to answer them. And like and subscribe if you have not done so already. And if you're into it, be happy.